Imagine a society where a leader's absolute most valuable currency isn't their wealth, right? Or like their military might, or some sort of aristocratic bloodline.
Yeah, which is usually how it goes.
Right. But instead, it's a single nickname. And it's a nickname given to them by their neighbors years before they ever acquired any real power.
That is, well, it's incredibly rare when you look at history.
It really is. So today, we are stepping far outside the modern media landscape. We're stripping away the flashing headlines, the geopolitical shouting matches, and all the sensationalized news chyrons that just plaster our screens 24/7.
Mercifully so.
Yeah, definitely. Because we are going to look directly at the foundational blueprint of one of the world's major religions. Welcome to the deep dive. We are so thrilled you are here with us. The source material we are unpacking today for you is this massive, incredibly detailed outline for a 10-part series. It's titled Islam Through the Lens of Humanity, a book series for American readers.
And, what makes this particular material so compelling right out of the gate is its stated mission.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it explicitly declares that the goal is not persuasion. There's no underlying motive to convert anyone here.
Right, which is refreshing.
Exactly. Instead, it aims for something that has become, frankly, increasingly rare and arguably much harder to achieve today, which is accurate, thoughtful comprehension.
Yeah, just understanding for the sake of understanding.
Yes. It asks the reader, so it's asking you, the listener, to examine a faith centered on the worship of God, moral responsibility, compassion, justice, and human dignity. And to do it completely decoupled from the political movements or, cultural identities that often kind of hijack the narrative.
That is a very, very difficult uncoupling to achieve, especially, I think especially for a Western audience, right? Because we are so used to viewing this specific religion through a lens of conflict or foreign policy.
Right, the news cycle lens.
Exactly. But our mission today is to look at the architecture of this belief system from the inside out, to really see the machinery of how it actually works.
The nuts and bolts.
Yeah. So regardless of whether you're like prepping for a comparative religion seminar, or maybe you're just trying to better understand the people in your neighborhood, or maybe you're just tuning in because you have this, insatiable curiosity about how human beings organize their search for meaning, this is for you.
We're glad you're here.
We really are. We are going to trace the logical evolution of these ideas. So we'll start the bedrock theology, then we'll examine how those ideas were embodied by a historical human exemplar. From there, we'll see how that behavior scales up into the family unit and societal justice.
Right, the ripple effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we'll look back at this explosion of historical scientific advancement and finally bring it all home to why millions of people in contemporary America are searching for this kind of meaning right now, today.
Because, really, it is the only logical way to parse a civilization-level paradigm like this.
Oh.
Well, you simply cannot understand a historical legacy without understanding the society that built it. And you can't understand that society without looking at the human exemplar they modeled themselves after.
Right.
And, of course, you can't understand that exemplar without understanding the foundational theology that drove him. It's all connected.
It's basically a sack of dominoes, so let's dig straight down into that bedrock. The very first concept the material tackles is the literal and conceptual meaning of the word Islam itself.
Yes, book one.
Right. And it does this by intertwining three very specific concepts: peace, submission, and faith. Now, I want to stop right there because in English, the word submission carries a lot of cultural baggage.
Oh, an immense amount.
Yeah. We tend to think of it as yielding to a conquering force, right? Or
Yeah.
giving up your autonomy, being defeated. It feels inherently negative to the hyper-individualistic Western mind. So how does this source material reconcile submission with peace? Because those seem like opposites to us.
Well, that linguistic friction is exactly where the deepest understanding begins, because in the Western tradition, autonomy is basically the highest virtue, right?
Oh, yeah. You're the captain of your soul.
Exactly. But the psychological burden of being the absolute center of your own universe is immense. It's exhausting.
I can relate to that.
Right, we all can. The paradigm presented in the source material suggests that true internal and external peace is actually unachievable as long as you're constantly fighting against the grain of the universe. Or, acting as your own ultimate moral arbiter.
So it's about giving up that impossible burden.
Yes. In this theological context, submission isn't a forced surrender to a tyrant. It's a conscious, willing alignment of your own desires with the will of a divine creator.
Hmm.
The argument is that by relinquishing the illusion of total control and submitting to a higher perfect wisdom, the human being is actually freed from existential anxiety. And faith, that third word faith, is the mechanism, the engine that makes that willing submission possible.
Okay, I see. So it's less about waving a white flag and more about, like, tuning an instrument to the correct pitch.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The peace comes from the harmony, not the
Yes.
defeat.
Precisely. And this leads directly into the core structural argument of the material. It introduces a triad:
Okay.
what one believes, how one worships, and how one behaves, which it refers to as character. The text insists these three are entirely holistic, like there is no reality where they exist independently of one another.
So you can't have one without the others.
Right?
Okay, so the material breaks this down into two distinct categories.
Yeah.
The foundations of belief and the 5 pillars of Islam. And looking at this, I keep visualizing a massive skyscraper.
Okay, let's play with this analogy.
All right, so the foundations of belief, which the text lists as belief in God, angels, divine scriptures, prophets, the day of judgment, and divine decree. That is the deep earth concrete foundation.
The stuff underground.
Exactly. When you walk past the skyscraper, you don't see the bedrock. You don't see the rebar driven hundreds of feet into the earth. But it's there, and it has to be there.
Right.
Then you have the 5 pillars. So that's the declaration of faith, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. Those are the visible load-bearing walls. They're the actions you can actually observe from the street.
I really like that. That is a highly effective way to visualize the mechanics of this theology. Because think about it, if you only pour the deep earth foundation, but you never erect the pillars, you just have an empty lot.
Yeah, you just have a hole in the ground.
Right. You have an internal belief system, but it never actually manifests in the physical world. There is no structure to house a lived experience.
Makes sense.
Conversely, if you try to build the visible load-bearing walls, the actions, without the unseen foundation, the entire building collapses under the wind shear of human nature.
Ooh, the wind shear of human nature. I like that.
Mhm.
Let's test that wind shear, actually. Because in the West, religion is often highly compartmentalized, right?
Oh, very much so.
It's basically a weekend activity. You attend a service for an hour, you feel a sense of spiritual elevation, and then on Monday morning, you go back to the quote-unquote real world where completely different rules apply.
The secular world.
Right. But the material explicitly concludes that this faith is a, and I'm quoting here, comprehensive way of life that combines faith, worship, ethics, and social responsibility. So, if we apply the skyscraper analogy, how does this comprehensive view actually function in daily practice?
Well, it functions by completely erasing the line between the sacred and the secular.
Erasing it entirely.
Entirely.
Yeah.
Because when religion is compartmentalized, ethics become compartmentalized.
I see.
Like a person might drop a $20 bill on the collection plate on Sunday, but then feel entirely justified in executing a ruthless, exploitative business deal on Tuesday.
Because Tuesday is business, not religion.
Exactly. But what this blueprint argues is that such compartmentalization is a structural failure. Let's look at 2 of those visible pillars you mentioned: fasting and charity.
All right, those are actions anyone can observe. You can literally see someone abstaining from food, and you can see them giving away money.
Right. But if you view those actions purely as rituals, then fasting is just organized hunger, and charity is just a religious tax.
Okay, so how do we attach them to the foundation?
Well, let's attach them to the unseen foundation. The material specifically highlights the divine decree and the day of judgment.
So the belief that there are ultimate consequences.
Yes. If you truly believe, down in your psychological bedrock, that you will face a literal day of judgment, where you are held universally accountable for how you handled your resources well, your entire relationship with money changes.
Because it's not yours anymore.
Exactly. You don't give charity merely to feel philanthropic or, to get a tax write-off. You give it because you believe wealth is a trust, and hoarding it while your neighbor starves is a spiritual crime.
Wow, a spiritual crime. That's a heavy way to view economics. And what about fasting? How does tying that to the foundation change the experience of, well, simply not eating?
Fasting becomes a physical embodiment of submission. It is a grueling, visceral reminder of your own fragility.
Because you realize how dependent you are on just a glass of water.
Exactly. But more importantly, the material argues it cultivates profound, inescapable empathy. You cannot theorize about the pain of poverty. You must feel the physical ache of an empty stomach.
So you're literally experiencing what the poor experience.
Yes. The unseen theology actively dictates the social ethics. You can't claim to be a person of faith in your heart while ignoring the destitute in your community. The structure simply cannot support that contradiction. It would collapse.
It's a closed-loop system.
Yeah.
The theology creates the empathy mandates the action, and then the action reinforces the theology.
Perfectly said.
Now, understanding a closed-loop system on paper is one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to understand how it functions in reality, we have to look at the person who originally demonstrated it. Which brings us to the historical human exemplar, the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes. This is where the abstract theology collides with a concrete human narrative. We're moving from the architectural blueprint to the master builder.
I love that. So the source material spends a lot of time establishing the scene of Arabia before Islam.
Yeah.
It talks about his upbringing, but it intentionally zeroes in on his pre-prophethood reputation.
Right.
Like, long before he ever claimed to receive a single word of divine revelation, he was widely known by a specific title, the trustworthy. And the text emphasizes endless examples of his honesty and integrity in trade and just, daily life.
And we have to contextualize why that matters so much.
Please do.
In a 7th century tribal society, they relied almost entirely on oral agreements, right? Trade routes, complex tribal alliances. A person's reputation was their absolute currency.
Because there's no backup plan.
Right. There were no credit scores or binding legal contracts enforced by a central state. If you were universally known as the trustworthy, and even among fiercely competitive tribes, it meant your ethical integrity was a known, undeniable, mathematical constant in their society.
Okay, I have to challenge this, though.
Go for it.
Because when we look back at history, every major leader, every founder of an empire or a massive movement has a great origin story.
Sure.
And it's usually written by the victors.
Yeah.
It's very easy to be the trustworthy when you are just a local merchant managing a caravan.
Yeah.
But power notoriously corrupts. We've seen it a million times.
Absolutely.
So how does the material prove that this wasn't just a convenient retroactive PR campaign, but a trait that actually survived the brutal realities of building a massive community and navigating intense persecution?
That is the exact friction the source material anticipates. It's a very fair question. The psychological and historical significance of establishing that pre-existing title is crucial here. The argument is that the prophethood was a continuation of a character that was already established under extreme public scrutiny.
Okay.
But to address your point about power corrupting, the material points out that his behavior did not change when the power dynamics shifted. Yeah. When he went from being a persecuted minority to literally a head of state, the material frames his tenure under the banner of leadership through service.
Leadership through service. Let's dig into that, because the section titled Mercy in Action gets incredibly granular here. It doesn't focus on battlefield tactics or political treaties, which is usually what history books focus on.
Right, the dates of battles.
Exactly. Instead, it specifically catalogs his treatment of children, his care for the poorest and most vulnerable members of society, and his profound respect for women and elders.
And you have to think about the societal norms of that era to really get how wild that is.
Set the scene for us.
Well, children were often seen as property, basically. The poor were totally expendable, and vulnerability was a liability. It was a harsh desert environment, the survival of the fittest.
So not a lot of social safety nets.
None at all. So for a leader to halt a public sermon because a child was crying in the congregation, or to prioritize the physical safety of society's most marginalized over the comfort of its elite, that was completely countercultural.
It's radical.
Highly radical. It demonstrated that humility and compassion weren't just like personal quirks he had. They were the strategic methodology for transforming a society.
The material actually lists his defining character traits. It gives truthfulness, justice, mercy, forgiveness, humility, and patience. And it makes one overarching declarative argument about them. It states, these were not occasional virtues, but consistent principles that shaped every aspect of his life.
And that phrase, not occasional virtues, is the answer to your previous challenge about power.
Because it's easy to be virtuous when it's convenient.
Exactly. Anyone can be patient when they are on vacation.
Right.
Anyone can be forgiving when the stakes are low and it costs them nothing. The real test of an ethical framework is whether it holds up under immense pressure.
And did it?
Well, the material asserts that under the threat of assassination during military campaigns and in moments of absolute uncontested victory, which is usually when human beings are most prone to vengeance and arrogance, these traits remain the operational constant.
But why is this so vital for the listener to grasp? Like, why does a modern deep dive into this faith spend so much oxygen on the specific behavioral quirks of one historical figure?
Because it proves the central thesis of the entire paradigm. Moral excellence is the only sustainable mechanism for transforming both individuals and entire civilizations.
Wow.
The societal transformation of Arabia wasn't achieved merely because a new set of laws was drafted. I mean, laws are broken all the time.
Every day.
It was achieved because the lawgiver was the ultimate exemplar of the laws he preached. It provides a radical counter-narrative to modern leadership, honestly.
Yeah, because today we often equate effectiveness with ruthlessness or volume or aggression.
Right. The louder you are, the more effective you are. But true, enduring leadership, the kind that actually survives for millennia, is rooted entirely in service and character.
Okay, so we have established that the individual's internal moral compass is the foundation, right? And we've seen how that compass was modeled by a historical leader. But individuals don't exist in a vacuum,
Right, we're social creatures.
right? They live in homes, they raise children. How does this demand for personal integrity translate into the messy, intimate reality of the social fabric?
This is where we shift from the macro to the micro. And the material does this by placing intense focus on the family unit, specifically the role and rights of women. The family is essentially the laboratory where these exemplary traits are tested and practiced daily.
The laboratory, I like that. The outline dives deep into women in Islam, covering the historical context, rights, responsibilities, education, and the concept of family and partnership. If we carry forward our architectural analogy, the family unit is the microcosm of the broader civilization.
Yes.
So if a marriage isn't a true partnership, or if half the population, the women, are intentionally kept uneducated or denied opportunity, the larger society simply will not function cohesively. It's like trying to fly an airplane with only one wing.
It's structurally impossible to sustain. The material emphasizes marriage as partnership and explicitly links the rights, responsibilities, and education of women to the bedrock foundation of a thriving society. But what is vital to understand here, and the text really leans into this, is that the material does not frame these rights as modern, progressive concessions patched onto an old religion.
Like they didn't just update it for the 20th century.
Exactly. Things like the right to own independent property, the right to education, or the right to explicitly consent to marriage. It frames them as fundamental, undeniable rights woven directly into the original 7th century blueprint.
Which back then must have been shocking.
In the context of the historical era, it was a massive, radical disruption of the status quo.
Okay, I want to pause here and address a massive elephant in the room.
Let's do it.
Because the material includes a very specific caveat. It states, understanding the position of women in Islam requires examining both its teachings and its historical impact. As a listener absorbing this today, how do we reconcile the pristine, equitable teachings outlined in this blueprint with the varied and honestly sometimes incredibly oppressive historical or cultural practices we see broadcast on the evening news?
Yeah, that is the big question. And it comes down to the difference between the architectural blueprint and the flawed human builders.
Oh, back to the skyscraper.
Let's look back at your analogy. The original blueprint, the core teachings of the faith, might call for perfectly balanced, load-bearing walls of equality, mandatory education for both men and women, and true economic partnership.
Right, that's what's on the paper.
But historically, human beings are the ones actually laying the bricks. And human beings are heavily influenced by pre-existing patriarchal norms, regional politics, tribal traditions, and just a general desire to maintain power.
So the builders decide to use cheaper materials,
Oh.
or they just throw up a wall where the blueprint explicitly said to build a door.
Precisely. That is exactly it. When you watch a 24-hour news cycle, you are often observing the flawed, compromised buildings constructed by human cultures over centuries.
Not the blueprint.
Right. The source material is urging you to walk past the flawed building, go into the architect's office, and look at the original schematics. It even highlights highly influential Muslim women in history, scholars, financiers, leaders, to prove that when the actual blueprint is followed without that cultural corruption, women thrive.
Because the core theological teachings remain equitable.
Yes, the theological core is stable. It's the cultural implementations that wildly vary from region to region.
That distinction cuts through so much modern noise. I really appreciate that framing. And this concept of a healthy microcosm extends beyond just the marriage partnership, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The material zooms out slightly to look at human relationships across the board. So it talks about the dynamics between parents and children, the respect for elders, the nurturing of friendship and community bonds. It categorizes all of this under social responsibility.
And this connects flawlessly back to our very first discussion about the closed loop system.
Right. Belief and action.
Exactly. Honoring your parents, checking in on a sick neighbor, or respecting the elderly aren't just polite suggestions for a nice society.
They aren't just good manners.
No, within the specific framework, they are literal expressions of faith. Social responsibility is the physical, measurable manifestation of a person's spiritual health.
You cannot be spiritually healthy while being socially toxic.
You literally cannot.
The emphasis on the elderly really caught my attention here.
Yeah.
Because we live in a society today that is obsessively youth-centric.
That's understatement.
Right. We constantly chase the new, the young, the disruptive, tech companies, fashion, you name it. But by explicitly codifying respect for elders as a foundational pillar of a thriving society, this blueprint makes a major statement.
It really does.
It declares that wisdom, patience, and lived experience have undeniable structural value.
And by doing that, it creates a generational safety net. A society that honors its elders while simultaneously nurturing its children is forced to think generationally rather than transactionally.
Oh, that's powerful.
You aren't just optimizing for the current fiscal quarter, right? You are building a continuum of care that spans generations.
Okay, so if we take this focus on societal harmony at the intimate family level, and we scale it up to the size of a nation, if you genuinely believe your family should be treated with dignity and your elderly neighbors with profound respect, how does that society govern itself?
Now we're talking at the macro level.
Right. How does it protect its most vulnerable on a massive scale? This brings us to a heavy, incredibly philosophical portion of the material: justice, equality, and human dignity.
This is the proving ground. This is where the internal character of the individual faces its ultimate external test against the complexities of the world.
The outline hits on some massive concepts here. It lists the definition of justice, economic responsibility and wealth distribution, human rights, absolute equality beyond race and ethnicity, and the imperative of standing against oppression.
Huge topics.
Yeah.
Very huge. But I want to zero in on a very specific phrase the text uses because it stopped me in my tracks. It states, justice is not merely a legal concept in Islam, it is a moral obligation.
Yes.
Let's unpack the friction there. In our modern secular world, we have almost entirely outsourced the concept of justice to institutions.
100%.
We rely on the police, the courts, the judges, and the literal legal code to dispense justice. So what does it actually mean for a person, for you listening right now, if justice is categorized as a personal, inescapable moral obligation instead of a legal one?
It fundamentally changes the enforcement mechanism of human behavior. Let me give you a metaphor.
Cease.
Think about the difference between slowing down your car because you see a police officer holding a radar gun.
Which we've all done.
Right. Versus choosing not to speed because you genuinely value human life and you don't want to cause harm.
Ah, okay.
When justice is purely a legal concept, your primary goal is compliance to avoid punishment.
You're just trying not to get a ticket. Exactly. You look for loopholes, you hire a better lawyer, the institution enforces the behavior. But when justice is a moral obligation, the enforcement mechanism is entirely internal. You become the judge of your own actions before you ever step foot in a courtroom.
This implies that a society relying solely on a legal system to maintain justice is inherently fragile. Because the moment the guard looks away or the radar gun is turned off, the system fails.
Exactly. It's built on fear of getting caught, not on internal integrity. Let's look at the concept of standing against oppression, which the text highlights. Under a purely legal framework, if you witness systemic inequality or if you see someone being marginalized based on their race or ethnicity, and you choose to look the other way.
Because it's not your problem.
Right. Because it is not technically illegal for you to ignore it or it's not your jurisdiction, you are legally safe. You haven't broken a law by minding your own business.
Okay, but under this blueprint,
Under the theological system described in this blueprint, if you remain silent in the face of injustice, you are spiritually failing. You have breached a moral obligation to the Creator.
wow. Because it ties right back to the bedrock we discussed at the very beginning, the Day of Judgment.
Yes, you see how it all connects. The theological bedrock directly supports the societal mandate. You are fighting for equality and standing against oppression, not just because it makes society more pleasant for everyone, but because you believe you are morally, personally accountable to God for how you treat God's creation.
And I imagine the same applies to economic responsibility.
Absolutely. The material discusses charity not as an optional philanthropy for billionaires, but as an obligation to rebalance the scales of economic justice. The faith internalizes the legal system. It demands that human dignity be universally protected, regardless of a person's race, class, or ethnicity, because that equality is a divine right bestowed by the Creator, not a temporary concession granted by a human government.
That is a staggering paradigm. It means that apathy and complacency in the face of injustice aren't just like character flaws, right? They are literal violations of the faith.
Exactly. Apathy is a spiritual failure.
Now, if you successfully build a society on these concepts, a society where internal moral justice is the baseline, where oppression is actively rejected, where wealth is responsibly circulated, and human dignity is elevated, you inevitably create a highly stable, safe environment.
A sanctuary, almost.
Right. And history shows us that when human beings feel safe and their basic needs are met with justice, their minds are free to flourish and innovate. Which leads us to the explosion of intellect detailed in the material. The mind and the world, focusing on the pursuit of knowledge and coexistence.
We are moving into the historical evidence of what happens when a society with a strong, equitable moral foundation turns its collective attention toward understanding the universe around it.
And the material points out a historical detail regarding the pursuit of knowledge that I just find completely fascinating. It notes that the very first word of the very first divine revelation wasn't a command to pray.
Right.
It wasn't fast or conquer or build. The first word was read or learn. It placed an immediate primary emphasis on the harmony of faith and reason.
Which fundamentally disrupts a very persistent, deeply ingrained modern narrative.
How so?
Well, today, particularly in the West, we often operate under the assumption that religion and science are locked in an eternal zero-sum war.
Oh, yeah. Like Galileo versus the church.
Exactly. The assumption is that faith requires the abandonment of critical reason, and that scientific discovery is inherently the enemy of spiritual belief. But this source material argues the exact opposite.
It embraces science.
Completely.
Yeah.
It posits that the aggressive pursuit of knowledge is deeply rooted in Islamic theology, because investigating the mechanical laws of the universe is the primary way of understanding the majesty of the Creator who designed those laws.
I want to try a metaphor here. Think about the golden age of Islamic civilization, which the material covers extensively, noting massive global advancements in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, art, literature, and philosophy. I think of this era like a massive lens.
Okay, a lens.
In our modern world, people often treat faith as a blindfold, something you put on to ignore the observable facts of reality, right?
Yeah.
Like you just close your eyes and believe. But during this golden age, faith wasn't a blindfold, it was the telescope. It was the very instrument through which they believed they could see the mechanics of the divine.
That is exactly how the scholars of that era viewed their work. Beautifully said. The pursuit of scientific knowledge wasn't a secular rebellion against religious authority. It was funded, encouraged, and driven by the religious imperative.
Driven by it.
Yes. When the text details Muslim contributions to science, it's highlighting a period where scholars aggressively translated ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian texts. They refined the scientific method. They built the world's first true universities and public hospitals. And they did this because of the theological bedrock.
How so? Can you connect the theology to the specific science for us?
Well, let's look at medicine. If preserving human life is a profound moral obligation, as we saw in the previous section on justice,
Right.
then advancing surgical techniques and understanding pharmacology becomes a religious duty. The body is a trust from God, so you must learn how to heal it.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Let's look at mathematics and astronomy. If your faith requires you to pray at highly specific times based on the position of the sun,
Which changes every day.
right, and you have to face a highly specific geographical location, Mecca, from anywhere on the globe, then mastering complex geometry, trigonometry, and astronomy isn't just an academic hobby.
It's a daily requirement.
It is a daily religious necessity. The theology demanded the science.
But here's the catch. You cannot have this kind of massive global intellectual flourishing without intense collaboration.
No, you can't.
You need diverse minds, different languages, and varied perspectives working together. And that brings us to a crucial component of the material: religious freedom and coexistence. The outline discusses diversity as a fundamental human experience, freedom of conscience, and historical examples of coexistence with different faith communities.
This is perhaps one of the most vital components of the historical legacy, and one that is, unfortunately, frequently overlooked today.
Because it doesn't fit the conflict narrative.
Exactly. The material outlines that mutual respect and peaceful coexistence are not modern progressive add-ons invented by 20th century secular humanists. It treats freedom of conscience, the absolute right to believe or not believe, as historically rooted in the ethical blueprint of the religion itself.
Just to clarify, when we say freedom of conscience, we are talking about the internal freedom of the mind, right? Like the protection of minority beliefs within a majority culture.
Yes, exactly that. And the text highlights historical evidence to prove this. During the Golden Age, in intellectual capitals like Andalusia in Spain or the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Islamic civilization was a highly pluralistic society.
It was a melting pot.
Completely. You had Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars, philosophers, and physicians working side by side. They were debating philosophy, translating texts, and advancing human knowledge collectively. The material makes a profound argument here. True, confident faith does not require the coercion of others.
Because coercion implies insecurity.
Exactly. If you are secure in your faith, you don't need to force it on anyone. Confident faith fosters coexistence.
It's the ultimate proof of that initial concept we discussed, peace through submission. If you are at peace internally, you do not need to violently dominate the intellect of your neighbor.
Beautifully connected.
Now, the material takes all of this, the history, the science, the theology, and points it directly at the modern era in a section titled Building Bridges Today.
Bringing it to the present.
Right. Because we've traveled from the bedrock theology to the life of the prophet, to the intimacy of the family, out to the macro level of societal justice, and up into the stratosphere of the golden age of science. But how do these ancient texts and historical legacies manifest in the lives of people right now? This is our final destination, the modern resonance.
This is where we answer the ultimate so what of the entire deep dive. We have unpacked the theory and the historical blueprint, but how does this function as a lived psychological experience today in the 21st century?
The material concludes by examining why people embrace Islam today. It focuses on the search for meaning, the desire for spiritual fulfillment, the need for community and belonging, and it actually shares personal stories of transformation in contemporary America.
Which is very telling.
It is. I want to reflect on you, the listener, for a moment. You tuned into this deep dive today out of intellectual curiosity. You wanted to bypass the noise and know more. And that search for meaning, that quiet, persistent desire to figure out where we fit in the grand architecture of the universe, is perhaps the most universal human trait in contemporary America, regardless of your background.
We are all looking for it.
We really are. We are living in an era of profound technological connection, but deep, aching social isolation.
And that isolation, that crisis of meaning, is exactly what the material addresses in its conclusion. In a hyper-connected yet fragmented world, people are suffering from a massive lack of cohesive purpose.
They have the how, but not the why.
Precisely. The material synthesizes all the previous concepts to explain why millions are drawn to this faith today. They aren't drawn to it because of sensationalized headlines.
Definitely not.
No, they are drawn to the comprehensive way of life because it offers a unified field theory for human existence. It takes the fragmented pieces of modern life, your work, your family, your community, your spirituality, and puts them back together into a coherent picture.
It provides the missing connective tissue.
That's it exactly. The historical model of the prophet offers a tangible template for ethical leadership in a modern world that is, let's be honest, utterly starving for integrity.
Yeah, starving is the right word.
The intense focus on justice, the protection of the family, and the elevation of human dignity provides stark moral clarity in a society that often feels paralyzed by moral ambiguity. And the legacy of intellect and coexistence appeals deeply to the modern mind that outright refuses to choose between rigorous scientific reason and profound spiritual faith.
You can have both.
You must have both, according to this blueprint.
The conclusion of the entire series summarizes this beautifully. It says, "Beyond headlines and misconceptions lies a faith that has inspired millions across generations to seek meaning, serve others, pursue justice, and strengthen their relationship with God."
It is a profound synthesis of the material. And notably, the text ends with an open invitation, not a rigid demand.
What do you mean by that?
It invites the reader to engage thoughtfully, to ask hard questions, and to explore with curiosity and respect. It is a testament to the absolute confidence of the source material. It doesn't ask the reader to blindly accept anything. It asks them to intellectually explore everything.
Let's take a deep breath and quickly recap the incredible territory we've just covered.
We covered a lot of
We
ground.
really did. We started by wiping the mud off the cultural window, looking past the stereotypes to see the actual bedrock, a holistic, closed-loop system where internal belief, outward worship, and social responsibility are entirely inseparable.
You can't have one without the other.
Exactly. Then we examined the human exemplar, whose legacy of extreme trustworthiness and mercy proved that consistent moral excellence is the only way to sustainably transform a society.
Right. And then we explored how that individual excellence scales outward, first into the family, where the blueprint explicitly protects the rights and education of women, and then out into broader society, where justice transforms from a fragile legal concept into an inescapable moral obligation to protect the vulnerable.
And we saw how that secure, just society fueled an unprecedented explosion of knowledge, a golden age where faith acted as the telescope for scientific discovery, all while championing religious freedom and intellectual
The
coexistence.
harmony of faith and reason.
Yes. Finally, we landed in the present day, seeing how this comprehensive architecture offers a profound sense of meaning, community, and moral clarity for millions navigating the complexities of contemporary America.
It truly provides a comprehensive lens through which to examine the human experience.
It really does. Now, as we wrap up our time together, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. We talked about how the material highlights that the very first revelation in this faith was a command to read, to learn, and to pursue knowledge.
The very first word.
Right. It reframes learning not just as a path to a better career or, a way to sound informed at a dinner party, but as a literal sacred duty. So, as you go about your day-to-day, I want you to ask yourself, if the aggressive pursuit of knowledge is actually moral and spiritual obligation, how does that change the way you view the everyday information you consume?
That's a great question.
How does it alter the intention behind the books you choose to read, the media you allow into your mind, or even the deep dives you choose to listen to?
If the pursuit of learning is a sacred act, then your curiosity is actually one of your greatest virtues.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some new ideas, challenged a few assumptions, and gave you a much clearer view of the blueprint. Keep asking the hard questions. Keep your intellectual honesty sharp, and above all, keep exploring. We'll catch you next time.